exactly what it means. Deputy O'Keefe asks whether we would be tabling a proposal to provide flexibility in capping. That is our desire as Ireland, very clearly. As presidency, we will have to consult with all 27 member states, see what the centre ground is, and see what it is, and see what the Commission have to say to us about the European Council conclusions. But from an Irish point of view, I can certainly say that we do believe that there should be flexibility for member states in where to place the cap. The issue of coupling then arose. That was actually discussed during the Cyprus presidency in the Council. The Parliament has also, of course, been discussing it. The Parliament is proposing some increases in the provision for coupling. The Council discussion under Cyprus was closed with the existing Commission proposal in place. So that will go into the trilogue negotiating process, and we'll have to see what comes out of that. The issue of areas of natural constraint, formerly known as less favoured areas or disadvantaged areas, unfortunately these things have multiple names, was mentioned on a number of occasions. The question of what's really going to be important here is the question of how you decide what qualifies as a disadvantaged area, to use the Irish term. Because the Commission have put forward new proposals on the determination of disadvantaged areas. They put forward a series of objective biophysical criteria. So things like stoniness of the soil, the slope of the soil, in our case the wetness of the soil and so on, would be used to determine exactly what qualifies as an area of natural constraint. But there is continued provision for it under Pillar 2 and also...
The question was specifically under Pillar 1.
I was just going to say, and under Pillar 1.
And under Pillar 1, but it was a proposal, that's still there.
Yes, but I was just making the point that the key thing is actually the determination of what is such an area, and that is actually where the negotiation is concentrating. On internal convergence, again, just to make the point in relation to our proposal and other people's proposals, any suggestion that the Irish proposal involves retaining the historic model is simply untrue. It involves a very decisive move away from historic rates of payment. Very decisive and very significant and large movements from historic rates of payment, but not as big or as radical as proposed by the Commission, who propose a complete flat rate for everybody, regardless of land type, regardless of what is being done on that land, regardless of the environmental benefits from that land, regardless of all of those things, simply a flat rate to everybody, crudely. It is true. We don't think that makes sense. It is true that we have tabled an alternative proposal which involves limiting to some extent the level and pace of the convergence of payments. But it does involve a very significant convergence in payments. It involves very large increases for those on low payments. It involves significant cuts for those on very high payments, and more moderate raises and cuts for those in the intervening groups. And I think that's very important to understand. Furthermore, our proposal, as tabled, provides for that is the minimum you must do. In other words, it creates the space for a member state to use the same methodology, but to do more should it wish to do so. We have also tabled a proposal providing for the possibility of a minimum payment per hectare and a maximum payment per hectare as part of that measure. And as you rightly say, the Minister has spoken in relation to the possibility of a minimum being introduced publicly. A number of questions arose in relation to Pillar 2, and particularly there were a number of questions from a number of deputies and senators in relation to the 15% transfer, and I don't want to cause undue alarm here. This again is an optional thing that has come out of the European Council, that you can transfer 15% either direction, basically. There are some countries that find it very difficult to spend their rural development funds. In fact, some countries have completely failed to spend their rural. They have huge savings on their rural development funds, and some of those countries, mainly new member states, want to transfer the money into Pillar 1. There are countries among the older member states who believe that Pillar 2 is much more effective than Pillar 1 and who want to transfer funds from Pillar 1 to Pillar 2. So both have been accommodated within the proposal. But it is completely voluntary. It is for national decision. Deputy Ferris and Deputy Hayden and others raised the question of greening. I'm not really in a position to outline what our compromise proposals will be at this stage. We will be tabling them in early March. I can say the following, perhaps. In the initial stages of the greening debate, there was a good deal of talk, and we talked about it ourselves, about the possibility of what we called a menu approach, giving a lot of flexibility to member states in how you structure the greening. In the latter stages of the debate, that has been less so. There's less talk of a menu approach, but there is more talk of introducing some greater flexibility within the Commission's own proposal. So sticking with the 3 criteria, but applying them in a way that is more flexible at member state level, particularly in relation to what we call equivalence. In other words, this is where if you have a scheme under your Pillar 2 allocation, an agri-environment scheme, which may deliver the same kind of benefits as greening, then the farmer could perhaps qualify automatically for greening. That is one way of doing it. Another is through what's called a national certification scheme, where you have a national scheme, not within either Pillar 1 or Pillar 2, but which again delivers at least the same benefits as greening, and a farmer could conceivably qualify under that. This mirrors an aspect of the Commission proposal that perhaps hasn't got a lot of attention, but it created an interesting precedent where the Commission said that people who are organic farmers were automatically green. So that has been, member states are somewhat expanding that. In relation to the 3 criteria for greening, I won't go into them in detail, I think you know them. There is a good deal of work going on making those a bit more flexible. For example, Deputy Barry mentioned the issue of land moving from tillage into permanent pasture. A very important point from an Irish perspective. The key thing there is that the Commission proposed that permanent pasture requirements should apply at an individual farm level. Ireland and other countries has taken the view that it should apply at a national level. That would still allow a lot of discretion at individual farm level. And while I can't tell you exactly what will be in our proposals on greening before we table them, I'd say you wouldn't be hugely surprised what we might table in that area. Moving on a little bit, a number of people talked about the issue, we dealt with flexibility, I think. Yes, on US, turning to Deputy Hayden, the US beef issue. The key thing blocking Irish beef to the US is a thing called the BSE provision, right, where the US blocks Irish beef entering the United States on the basis of concerns about BSE. However, in fact, the United States and Ireland have exactly the same status on BSE. So this blockage has, in our view, no merit whatever. And we have been very, very active in pressing the United States to lift that barrier. Some progress has been made. There is an expectation that what is called the BSE rule might be published this year. We continue to exert a lot of pressure to get that done. You asked about the timeline also for the US deal, and that probably trade deal that will take longer. I mean, that is these trade deals sometimes take 2 years, for example, to negotiate. However, we will be pressing on the BSE rule issue in advance of that. That's the key thing. You talked about the EFA sentence in the ecological focus area sentence in the European Council conclusions, and there is indeed a good deal of discussion as to what exactly that means. But one of the things it might mean, which was also referred to by Deputy Barry, is the issue of growing protein crops. So how do you get a farmer to set up an ecological focus area but not reduce production? One way perhaps is to get him to grow crops on that which fix nitrogen in the soil, if that can be regarded as ecological focus. It has been the Irish position for some time that it should be regarded as ecological focus. So again, there is a question of what we can propose in the greening proposal. There is, I should say, on that particular issue, the Commission have major concerns that could be seen as coupling and therefore a WTO, but that is an issue we'll have to work our way through. The trilogue process, how's the EP represented? It's represented, well, we hope. What we hope is that the Commission, that the plenary of the European Parliament will give ComAgri a mandate to negotiate in mid-March. That would mean then in the trilogue process that the Parliament will be represented by the Chairman of the Agriculture Committee, Paolo De Castro, and the individual MEP rapporteurs on the different regulations, Mr. Capoulas Santos, Mr. Lavia, and Mr. Danton. 15% transfer, I think I've dealt with that. Capping and front-loading, will they be there? Senator Comiskey asked. Yes, but if you mean by front-loading, what we now call the redistributive payment, or the payment on first hectares, which has been sought by a number of member states, that is part of our proposal. We have tabled that. So it is part of our proposal. Capping, I've already dealt with. It will be there in some shape or form, but it's not yet clear what shape exactly it will be. You also asked, will Pillar 2 have scope for payment on disadvantaged areas and on things like animal welfare, subject cow welfare? The answer is yes. Again, up to national decision to make, up to member states to make national decisions on this. Pillar 2 gives you a lot of national discretion. The emergency funding, the crisis reserve. I think there's maybe some misunderstanding on the figures there. The crisis reserve will amount to about 400 million per year over the whole EU. The Irish share of that would be about 12 million. It is a rolling allocation, you're right. In other words, it will be extracted from the direct payments and paid back at the end of the year if not used. That's the intention. But it is 12 million a year in Ireland, roughly. So it's not kind of on the scale that maybe the fears were. The reference year issue was mentioned a number of times by Deputy Deering and others. Yes, it has been an issue in Ireland. I have to say, I think I've said it here before, not raised in any other member state as an issue. We continue to say to people, do not make decisions on the basis of proposals. The proposals are there, as you know. I won't go into them again. You know that there is this reference back to having had a payment in 2011. In the Council proposal, that's now expanded to having had a payment in either 2010 or 2011. But in any case, this issue remains as it was, but with that change in the Council position. But of course, there will be, again, remember, all of this will go into a trilogue negotiation between the Parliament, the Council and the Commission. So again, we are warning people, don't assume that what is there is the final outcome. That is the best I can say on that. The Young Farmer Incentive is indeed in the proposals. It is now voluntary for member states. The Minister has made very clear that he intends it would operate in this country. On greening, is greening extra bureaucracy? If I was entirely honest with you, I think I'd have to say yes. We made a counter-proposal in the very early stages of the negotiation saying that it would be better to roll greening into cross-compliance and simply apply it to the whole payment. It would make things simpler. Ireland and Austria were the only ones to propose that at the time. I can tell you without a word of a lie, I have since been approached by a number of countries who said that we were right, but it didn't fly at the time. So we are still trying to minimise the amount of extra bureaucracy it will involve, though. And that is very much in our minds in making the proposal. But if I told you it didn't involve extra bureaucracy, I'd simply be giving you an untruth. The crisis reserve I've mentioned, 15% I've mentioned. The 100 million extra negotiated, what that was an additional amount, our total allocation for rural development. If that had not been negotiated, our total allocation for rural development over the 7 years, in real terms, would have been 100 million less. That's what it means. So if you take that 100 million, spread it over 7 years and adjust it for inflation, that's the additional we got. It's something more than 100 million then, the exact figure. So it was a significant addition in the finals, in the very, very final lap that we got. Again, a number of references on internal convergence, and Senator Doyle touched on this. Again, there may be an impression abroad that our proposal favours larger farmers rather than smaller farmers. If you look at our proposal and look across all the payment categories, right, so those with low payments, those with middle payments, those with high payments, farm size is roughly the same in all of those categories. It does not favour larger farmers. That is just not true. I mean, statistically, it's just not true. There are both small farmers and large farmers who would be significantly affected by a major cut in rates. What I can tell you, though, where the distinction between the farmers does arise is in their stocking rates. Those from whom payments will fall have much higher, have significantly higher stocking rates, on average double the stocking rates of those in the lower payment rates. And that is on that's on 2010 data. So it is true that these payments are based on historic data. But as we all know, things change a little bit slowly in farming. And the fact is that our data shows very clearly that those on higher payments have significantly, as I say, roughly overall double higher stocking rates than those on the low payments. And that holds for small and big farmers. That's the point. So that returns to a point that the Chair made at the end. What we're trying to do is to ensure that there isn't an unreasonable cut in the payments for the most active, most productive farmers. That's what we're about here. We're not trying to hit small farmers or anything else like that. That's simply a misrepresentation of what we're at. The Chairman rightly referred also to other possibilities within the regulation in relation to active farmers. Now, the active farmer proposal itself is fairly limited, but as the Chairman referred, there is also within the definition in Article 4 of the Direct Payments Regulation a possibility for a member state on certain types of land to impose minimum activity levels, minimum stocking levels. I mean, you mentioned, I think, some farmer who has no stock at all and very high payments. That would be an interesting case. I think I've covered most points there, Chairman. If I haven't, I apologise.
Very specifically,
very quickly, because we're out of time.
Just in relation to co-funding. In other words, the total rural development, the Pillar 2 pot, next time compared to this time, based in the MFF. And the forestry issue.
Sorry. Yes, you're quite right. I neglected both. On the forestry issue, on both issues, actually, I'm afraid I have to say, these are matters that will be for national decision once the flexibility is there in the regulation. In other words, when the Rural Development Regulation is agreed in this CAP reform, we have to draw up a rural development programme. We are already engaged in a very extensive consultation process and we're undertaking what they call an ex-ante appraisal. So we've already commenced work on the new rural development programme. But ultimately, what will have to happen is that the government will have to make policy decisions as to what it wants to include in that rural development programme, whether, for example, it wants to include forestry or not, or to fund it as it currently is nationally. And secondly, to decide how much funding it wants to put into the rural development programme. As Deputy O'Keefe correctly says, in the last rural development programme, we put in not only the money that was needed for the co-funding, but also additional funding. That was subsequently cut back somewhat. But nevertheless, additional funding was put in. Now, that is an issue that will have to be decided when we reach that point in the national decision-making process, and we are some way from that yet.
Okay. Listen, I think that's been a pretty detailed, first of all, presentation, and then response to the extensive range of questions that were posed by the members of the committee. I'd like to thank Mr. O'Driscoll and Ms. Cannon and Ms. McPhillips for coming in. I think it is important, as you know, you probably have a copy of the document we submitted back in December, where I think and I keep saying this, and I'll keep saying it, if the objective of a new CAP is, as the Commissioner said at the outset, to produce as much food as possible within the EU sustainably and to protect rural communities, then I think Ireland has no problem with that. I think what we need to do, I think our key first principle of flexibility for the member states, and then we take ownership in as much as possible. We have accepted a move towards convergence. Pace and extent is probably the issue that has to be decided, and the same with regard to greening. I think they're probably the two with regard to active farmers, and I still think that holds the key to a lot of the other issues around reference years and flexibility. And I don't necessarily hold the view that the reserve is something that I think if the National Reserve works properly, it can be actually used to facilitate young farmer entrance. And to that end, the committee, the chair, as chair of the committee, I will be hosting on the 11th of March a meeting in Dublin Castle of all the chairs as part of our presidency across the EU member states. We're dealing with the CAP, we're dealing with the Common Fisheries Policy, but we're also dealing with the young farmer issue. Because the interesting thing is that our statistics mirror those of the EU with regard to the number of farmers under the age of 35. We're probably at the same 7 or 8%, and it's the same across Europe, so it's not just an Irish issue. We probably have more over 70 than other member states, but we certainly have only about the same number. They only have the same number under 35. And if we're going to produce food in that way, we need to have young, trained professionals at the helm of managing the land, not necessarily owning it. I think that's a hang-up that we in Ireland in particular have had. And when you mention the reference years, because of our Conacre system, we have a specific challenge here, and it goes beyond these CAP negotiations. It goes to the core of the manner in which we allow people, and it's been alluded to several times by Deputy Barry and others in particular, how we actually rent out land from non-owner activity to rental activity. So I think it's a challenge beyond this discussion, but it's something that we should be mindful of. So we've just gone over time. I think we're probably okay for about 2 minutes. But anyhow, I'd like to thank Mr. O'Driscoll again and your colleagues, and we look forward to ongoing briefing. This next couple of months are going to be crucial from an Irish perspective, and we wish yourself, the Minister, and all the officials, and indeed our MEPs, all the very best in the ongoing negotiations. As there's no further business, the meeting stands adjourned.
Briefly before you finish, if you don't mind, Chairman.
Yeah.
But would it be appropriate, as we're heading to a very intense stage now in negotiations, would it be appropriate that we would have a similar type briefing within the next 6 weeks?
Yeah, if these are the 6 monthly rounds, but yeah, it'll be over in 6 months. Yes. No, I accept that. Yeah, okay. We seek to if maybe during the trilogues we'll negotiate with the protocol.
I mean,
I think we would all welcome that, Mr. O'Driscoll. Yeah, okay. Fair point. Okay. As there's no further business, the meeting stands adjourned for Tuesday, the 26th of February at 2 p.m. Thank you.